Welcome to the People and Planet podcast, a show all about human health, planetary health, and the links between them. I'm your host, Alya Al-Hamed, an integrative nutrition health coach with a master's in environmental sustainability. I spent most of my life exploring these topics, and this podcast is my effort to collect and deliver information from experts to improve the quality of your life and that of our planet. Thank you so much for being here. In today's episode, I'll be interviewing Dave Neale, who is the Global Animal Sentience and Welfare Director for the Animals Asia organization. Animals Asia is an organization devoted to ending bear bile farming and improving the welfare of animals across Asia, promoting compassion and respect for all animals, and working with local communities to bring about long-term change. Founded in 1998 by Jill Robinson, the Animals Asia team has been rescuing bears since 1994 and now operate bear rescue sanctuaries in China and Vietnam. Dave leads a series of welfare and education programs within Animals Asia aimed at improving the welfare of captive wild animals in China and Vietnam, working in partnership with government wildlife rescue centers and zoos to implement management training initiatives for animal managers and vets. Dave leads a campaign to end the use of animals in circuses and to end elephant riding tourism in Vietnam, and has established the country's first ethical elephant tourism experience in partnership with the Yok Don National Park. Dave has a particular interest in education and has developed a capacity building education program promoting the concepts of animal sentience, emotions, and cognition within the teaching curriculums in China and Vietnam. Dave regularly delivers lectures on animal welfare issues and the concepts of sentience, emotions, and cognition, encouraging the public to develop a greater empathy for all animal species. Dave passionately believes that the route to tackling the widespread issues of animal suffering across the world lies in a greater understanding of animals as emotionally and cognitively complex individuals and beings. I am honored and grateful to be speaking with Dave today, as I've been deeply moved by the work of Animals Asia for many years and have been following their work for many years. I hope you enjoy today's conversation. Hello, Dave. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to my podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and to speak to us about Animals Asia and all the work that you do. How are you feeling? How are you doing?
Hi, Alya. I'm very well, thank you, and delighted to be here and to give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about some of our work that we're doing out in China and Vietnam.
I've been such a huge fan and supporter of the work that Animal Asia has been doing over the past few years. And I would love to talk about how it started, talk a little bit about Jill Robinson and what her inspiration was, and what bear bile farming is to people who don't know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump right in with answering as much as I possibly can.
So let's just jump right in. So what has the work around bear bile farming been like for Animals Asia? How did it start? Can you maybe tell us a little bit about Jill Robinson and how she got inspired?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I've been working with Animals Asia for over 22 years, and the organization is just over 25 years old. So I've been with the organisation for much of the time that it's been running. It was set up by Jill Robinson back in 1998, and as you mentioned, on the back of trying to tackle this one particular issue, which is the farming of bears for their bile, which is used in traditional Chinese medicine. And Jill came across this back in the early 1990s as an issue which was happening within China, and wanted to dedicate her time and to set up an organization specifically to try to deal with this issue, and did that back in 1998, registering the organization in Hong Kong, and then get an agreement to work within Sichuan province within China to start to set up a rescue center for bears who could be removed from these bear bile farms by the government. So bear bile farming, just for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's a particularly gruesome practice. Asiatic black bears were being kept. Most of those were originally caught from the wild, and then subsequently a number of them will have been bred in captivity. They're being kept in incredibly small cages, and they have a fistula put into their stomachs, which goes through into the gallbladder, and a tube which removes bile. So the bile which they produce is removed from them on a daily basis, and then that bile is used within traditional Chinese medicine, with the concept being that the ursodeoxycholic acid, the UDCA, which is within the bile, has various medicinal properties and can then be used for all kinds of different ailments, and some of which it may have some impact for, many of which it won't have any impact for whatsoever. But that was the basis of the start of bear farming. And actually bear farming started maybe in the 1990s as a measure to try to prevent the killing of bears in the wild. So wild bears were being killed and their gallbladders being removed, and then the bile was being sold from wild bears. So the idea of the farming of bears was initially, in a sense, a conservation exercise to try to save the wild population by producing a captive population of bears which could produce the same ingredients. But obviously what has happened in practice is that there's no evidence to suggest that the breeding of bears in captivity or the beginning of bear farming has really helped the wild bear population. There's no the wild bear population is still under major threats from various reasons, including obviously habitat loss, habitat degradation, and the farmed population has continued to go up, and the bears on those farms are then suffering for a long period of time. So some of these bears stay alive in these farms for many years and have this excruciating extraction of the bile. And as you can imagine, it's an open fistula which is being tapped into on a daily basis. You can imagine there's a huge amount of pain involved for these individual bears, and they're also being kept in incredibly small cages. So it's an issue which Jill came across and dedicated herself to doing something about, but also knew that the only way of doing something about it was to work alongside the government to try to find a solution, or to give the government an opportunity to remove some of these bears from these bear farms and to provide a sanctuary for them. So Jill set about setting up the China Bear Rescue, which was our first sanctuary in China, to be able to say to the government, we now have a facility where you can bring the bears to us and we can try to help rehabilitate them. So that's in a very short space, in a nutshell, is how Animals Asia started and why Animals Asia is working on the issue of ending bear farming.
Yeah, and I heard a story about Jill Robinson that she was in Vietnam and she actually came across a few bears in these cages and just was totally heartbroken and I assume inspired to do something and to take action. And just to give people a really good visual, because this is also what captivated me when I saw the work that you all do on social media. I want to give people a really good visual of what's actually happening. These are huge, majestic creatures living in tiny cages for almost their whole life. I didn't know this initially started as a conservation practice, but I mean, in any case, this is a really excruciating and horrendous way to live. And then I don't know the name of that apparatus you said, but what it looks like to me is like there's a needle going into their stomach or into their digestive system to extract the bile, which is happening, as you said, on a daily basis, and that's excruciating. And then some of these bears are actually giving birth to baby pups, right? Where they are now being born and raised in captivity in these small cages. And these cages are, I mean, the environment of this life and these cages are horrific. And so we're going to share hopefully some visuals here so people can really take a look and understand how dire the situation is. But the good news is, Animals Asia has worked so tirelessly to, I think, make this illegal now in Vietnam. Is that correct?
Yeah, initially Animals Asia set up to work within China and then expanded into Vietnam. So a similar problem in Vietnam. Fortunately, the numbers of bears and bear farms is much smaller than Vietnam, with Vietnam being a smaller country. And Vietnam has made the extraction of bear bile illegal and is now working with us to remove all of the bears on bear farms. And over the last decade or so, then Animals Asia has now set up 2 sanctuaries in Vietnam to accommodate rescued bears. And we're now very much on the road to ending bear bile farming in Vietnam, so that there'll be no more bears on bear farms. So we've recently opened up our second sanctuary, which will be able to accommodate the last couple of hundred bears and take them off these bear farms in Vietnam, and there will no longer be any bear farming in Vietnam, hopefully by the end of 2026. So we're about a year and a half away from meeting that goal, which is an incredible achievement for the work that has been put in by Jill, but also by the team in Vietnam, to be able to get to the point where we have the trust of the government to be able to carry out this program and provide a solution to the problem of keeping these bears on bear farms.
I'd love to talk about that and some of the interventions Animal Asia put into action or influenced, which got you to where you are today, which is actually influencing legislation. And I think part of the work you do is on education and educating some of these kind of medical practitioners to maybe change their use of bile farming or bile harnessing for medical practices, and maybe substitute it for something else. Can we maybe talk about that a little bit, and some of the work and the intervention that went into getting to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you can imagine, I mean, to be able to reach that goal, to be in that position, then, it takes a huge amount of work and lots of different strands as well. So we have one of the most important things, obviously, is firstly to develop that relationship with the government, both the national government and the provincial government, to be able to get the trust of those authorities to be able to do this work. It's a very sensitive area. You're dealing with a species of high conservation value. It's also an issue which creates a lot of emotion around the way that these bears have been treated in the past. And the government, I guess, needed to know that they were working with an organisation that they could trust, that was going to be honest with the public about the problems that were involved, but also was going to work fairly with the government and also with the bear farmers as well, who, after all, were still making an income from this, and it's something which had been endorsed by the government up until the change in the government's practice, and the change that the government brought into to ban the extraction of bile. So we needed to get that support from the government first of all, and that takes a long time to be in country to be able to work and to get that the confidence of those individuals. Once we've got that, we also need to bring the public along with us as well. So we need to be able to look at the demand side. Whilst there's a demand for something, obviously, then it's much more likely that it's going to continue. So we did a lot of work in terms of just raising awareness about the welfare problems, but also about the alternatives. So a lot of this really was just that it was a substance which people were taking because they perceived it to be a medical benefit to them. So we needed to be able to say there are also alternatives, rather than just saying don't take this substance. Try these alternatives. These are plant-based alternatives. These are synthetic alternatives. So promoting those alternatives. We now actually have a product ourselves, which Animals Asia has been working with traditional medicine practitioners, which are against the use of any endangered species products. That we have a product which we now freely give to members of the public within Vietnam, to be able to use as an alternative to using bear bile. So we needed that support from the government. We needed the support from the public. We needed the support from the traditional medicine practitioners as well. And so we're working in all of these different areas to build up that support over time and build up the confidence of all of these different sectors that Animals Asia is in this for the long run, but not just for the bears, but also to support the people which are currently working within the bear farming industry, to be able to transition away to doing something different. And then on top of that, then obviously we have a whole educational campaign to try to go out into schools and into local communities, again, just to sort of raise awareness about bears, about the conservation of bears, about the threats that bears in the wild face, and then to bring in the issue of the keeping of bears in captivity and what's happening within people's local community, just to try to again raise awareness and gain more support for continuing to remove these bears from the bear farms and bringing them to our sanctuary. So it's been a huge operation. It's been a huge campaign, And, we're so pleased that, at least for Vietnam now, Vietnam is definitely really showing the way within the region to how this issue can be tackled, and how it can be tackled working alongside an NGO who can provide that expertise and support on the ground.
I think that piece is so important, that you didn't just take away this medicinal product. You actually not only educated the local population, you helped them come up with a replacement for this medicinal a product that they so commonly use in their practice. So, because I just don't think it would be as sustainable if you didn't go that route and you just said, let's just take this away and make such a huge change without the understanding and without that replacement. When it comes to like educating younger people in school institutions, do you talk about bear sentience and their kind of understanding of suffering, or their capability to emote, or their social capabilities? Do you talk about this, and does it have an impact on the way that people respond?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I've learned from working in this field for such a long time, and that us as an organization has learned as well, is that if you just talk about the issue and the cruelty, then a lot of people turn away from that because it's quite an upsetting topic to discuss. But also, you're not really giving people a full understanding of why it may be something which you are opposed to. And I think to get that full understanding, you do have to take a step back and try to raise awareness and educate people about sentience and about the way that a bear as an individual experiences its world. And this is something which we've now taken outside of just our bear work, and we work on all kinds of different species, and we do this with all of the different species that we work in that we very much try to give people an understanding of the emotional capabilities, the cognitive capacities, and the social capabilities, the capacities of individual animals and individuals within the species, so that they get a really broad understanding of just how, if they are left in the wild, they would live their life, how they would communicate with each other, how they would interact with each other, the joy that they can have from those interactions, as well as the fear that they can have from those interactions as well. I mean, it's positive and it's negative, but they have emotional responses. If people can get an idea and an understanding that they have similar emotional responses that we have, then you start to empathize with them as individuals more, and then you can start to talk about the practices which are causing them to suffer, and people can understand that suffering much easier than just going straight into the issue of welfare. And so by bringing in that idea of sentience and emotions and cognition and the social aspects of animals' lives, then you give a rounded idea, a picture of the species, which people can then say, okay, well, why would we want to treat them like this when they are such complex emotional individuals? So yeah, that's really been quite important aspects of our work with bears, but also our work with some other species, which no doubt we'll come on to and talk to later in this podcast.
Yeah, I think the shift of seeing an animal from, as a product to a being is so important in the work you do. Could we unpack it specifically for bears right now, and what you've seen? First, the science that, behind it, but also what you've seen firsthand with Animals Asia in the kind of captivity environment and the cruelty that they've been facing in those environments, and then what you see when they've been rescued and they're allowed to just be free in the sanctuary. Because I've been touched by those images on your social media platforms. So could you just share a little bit as to like what you've seen and what science has showed us in terms of like how they not only respond to cruelty, but how they understand it, what's going on with them emotionally and cognitively, so people can really have a good visual about these bear bile farms?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from what we've seen, then, just from being on these farms, and you see what we always really just describe as broken individuals, broken bears. I mean, you're seeing an animal which is going through a huge amount of physical pain, but also psychological suffering. And as you can imagine, bears are incredibly stoic animals, so they generally sort of go into a shutdown mode, where they will have periods where you can see that they are going through an intense amount of pain, but then they become very, very quiet and very, very still. And this is something which is disturbing in a way, because you would expect an animal like this to be raging all of the time. But really, I mean, this happens with a lot of animals in captivity. Then, eventually an animal begins to realize that there's nothing that it can do to be able to free itself from that situation. So it's more likely to go into this status of really kind of shutting down and trying to deal with it by shutting down. You also get these stereotypic behaviors, which we see in many animals, particularly within bears within these situations. So they will either move backwards and forwards on a what looks like a random basis, but it's actually a coping mechanism to help them to actually deal with the situation they're in. In some of the worst cases, you get self-mutilation as well. So they will start to actually chew at their own body parts, which obviously then causes more physical problems and more physical pain for them. So the welfare for these individuals is something which is obviously a major concern, both the physical welfare, but also their psychological welfare in terms of the situation that they're in. Fortunately for many of those individuals, when they do get the opportunity to be in a different situation, then there is a possibility for them to recover. Now, not all of them are going to recover because of the situation that they've been in, but many that have come to our sanctuary have lived long and happy lives by being taken from those bear farms. Obviously, they need a huge amount of physical intervention from our veterinary team to be able to deal with any of the infections and problems that they've developed whilst they're on bear farms. But it's actually the most important work is really around their psychology and being able to put them into a completely different frame of mind. Now, we've had bears which it's been impossible to be able to remove because the situation has become so entrenched within their minds. It's just not possible to be able to take them away from the negative side of how they've been cared for. But the majority of them, I'm very pleased to say, and you see from our social media feed, given the right amount of time, given the right amount of opportunities, and being able to provide them with things which they would naturally do in the wild, then they start to change relatively quickly, and we see a completely different individual. So if you see individuals which are being rescued, maybe on one day, and you go back a year later, the majority of those individuals you would never recognize. Physically, you wouldn't recognize them because they've come in with such a poor demeanor that they physically change, because obviously they've been fed very nutritious food, so they're obviously much fitter and healthier. But just in terms of their psychology, they're now much more optimistic as individuals about things which are happening to them during the day. And although these bears in the wild will often be relatively solitary, then once they're in captivity and once they're being provided with all of their needs, they're actually incredibly social. So we can start to integrate them with other individuals. We can see who they do and who they don't like to spend time with, and then they develop these incredible friendships with individuals within their group, and they'll spend their time with those individuals. They'll spend time sleeping with them, feeding at the same time, and also playing as well. So I think one of the things that we see at our sanctuaries more than anything is bears which are just happy and playing and just completely removed from that old life, which was just so incredibly dire and so deprived for them. They're now within an environment where they feel safe enough to be able to express all of those positive emotions, and providing them with those opportunities, either with objects that they can manipulate and play with, but most importantly with other individuals, other bears that they develop those relationships with. And then bears gamboling all around on top of each other and playing is probably the best sight that you can have for somebody that's visiting one of our rescue centres, because there you can see that you've now transformed those bears' lives, and you transformed them emotionally and socially into a position now where they feel happy enough to be able to just play and enjoy themselves.
And I guess those are very important indicators that they're healing from their trauma. But what's also so crazy to think about is some of these bears have never actually experienced grass or a pool or a pond, or even like flat ground. So for people who don't have the visual of the animals in the cage, these cages are not like flat ground. At least, correct me if I'm wrong, those are the photos I saw. It's actual cages with wires. So their paws are not actually experiencing soil or flat ground where the whole surface area of their paws touching the ground. And when you say they pace back and forth as a coping mechanism, they're pacing back and forth within like a cage that's what, a meter or 2 meters? Like it's very, very small. And for a huge animal like that, so they're pacing maybe back and forth between maybe 5 to 10 inches, like they're barely really moving. And so for some of these bears who were born into that cage and only lived in those cages, and again, from the images I saw, it's like in dark rooms. I don't even know if they've ever experienced grass, a pond, swimming, flat ground, sunshine. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, majority of these bears will have been born. Maybe when they were cubs, they may have had a little bit more opportunity to be able to move around. But certainly, as soon as they go into the bile extraction, then the majority of them will be confined into those really small environments where. Yes, I mean, we say pacing is more rocking, I guess, just sort of moving backwards and forwards within a really small area. So getting that opportunity to suddenly be in a very extensive environment where you have all of these riches of the things which they have available to them, the open air, all of those sounds, which come from being in these amazing sanctuary environments that we've created, suddenly is just really rich for their senses, and gradually they start to sort of revert to some of those natural behaviors which they would have had the opportunity to do had they not gone into the bear farming industry in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cubs is the word for the baby bear. I think I said pups earlier because I couldn't find the word and I wasn't sure, so it's cubs. Do you ever find that they hesitate when they go into the sanctuary, that they're a bit shy, they don't trust? Do you ever find that they just take a moment to actually, they're reserved, they don't understand, or maybe they even display like antisocial behavior or aggression because they're just not used to being free?
Yep, absolutely. All of the above, I think. And I think this comes down to, the idea of personalities, just like us, all of the individuals have their own individual personality. So every one of them will react differently to the situation when they're presented with it. So, some individuals are much more optimistic as personality wise, so they're much more likely to embrace new environments and new situations. Others are a little bit more pessimistic and are much more likely to take much more time to be able to see that an environment is something positive for them. But they also have the different histories, the different ways that they've been treated. Some of them have been on bear farms for longer than others. Some of them maybe have been treated better on bear farms than others by the workers. So it really does depend on that history and those individuals as the personality types that they have. And again, like all animals, and just like ourselves, we're all different, they're all different as well. Providing them with the same opportunities doesn't always mean that they will react in the same way. What we need to do then is to get to know them better as individuals, and then to adapt the way that we look after them as individuals to make sure that it fits with their personality. So if they are very gregarious and we know that we can just open the doors and we can release them into a new environment and they're just going to go crashing into it and play around, then that's great. But if we know that doing that or presenting that environment is going to be very scary for those individuals, then we can do it in slightly different ways so that they come to learn over a period of time that the environment that we're asking them to go out and enjoy isn't going to be a harmful one. Yeah, it's. I think that's the interesting part of this work, and again relates back to, you were talking earlier about sentience, about them being individuals and needing to know them as individuals and then treat them as individuals to ensure that we can give them the best possible environment and best possible care for them as an individual.
Can we talk a little bit more about the sanctuary and where Animals Asia is at right now? Are you employing local communities to help take care of the bears? Are you acquiring more land? Where are the sanctuaries? Or is it only one, or is it plural? Are there plural sanctuaries in different countries? And where can people learn more? Or if they want to participate or support, how can people do that?
Yeah, so we've got 3 sanctuaries now. So we have a sanctuary in Chengdu in China, which is the very first sanctuary that was set up when we set up an agreement with the Sichuan government within the province of Sichuan to be able to provide care for bears which the government removed from bear farms. And that has then led us into working in Vietnam, and we have 2 sanctuaries, one in Tam Dao National Park, which is north of Hanoi, and another one now in Bac Ma National Park, which is further south from Hanoi. And these sanctuaries, the Bac Ma one is the newest one, and the Bac Ma sanctuary will be the sanctuary which takes the remaining bears from bear farms in Vietnam and ends all bear farming in Vietnam. All of the sanctuaries employ local employees. In fact, the majority, over 95% of employees, all of the people working with the bears, all of the horticultural staff, all of the maintenance staff, the security, are all local employees. We do employ some expats expertise, so experts, veterinary expertise, behavioural management expertise, to be able to lead the teams, to be able to provide that expert care. But I'm very pleased to say, actually, within Vietnam, and we're moving the same way within China as well, then that's beginning to change. So because we've now been working in country for a long period of time, then we've been able to put in very extensive training programs to be able to upskill the local bear managers to become leaders within their own field. So our sanctuaries are now working towards being 100% managed by local people, so local Vietnamese within Vietnam and local Chinese within China. We still have an oversight team of expat experts, but again, that's been one of our visions. And actually, I think particularly within Vietnam, it's one of the reasons why the government has been so supportive of our work, because again, we haven't wanted to just be an organisation that continues to bring people from abroad to be able to provide care for these bears. It's been very much a case of saying we will bring expertise when it's not available in country, but the majority of workers and the majority of people at our sanctuaries will be from the local community. So, we've been able to provide that employment as much as anything within the local community, and also help to improve the animal management and the veterinary management knowledge within country, so which will go on to help other animals beyond our bear sanctuaries.
I would love to talk about the other work that you're involved with and Animal Asia is involved with. I know there are other animals that you rescue as well. And I know you're also involved with educating different sectors of animal welfare or groups of people working with animals, like for tourism. Where would you like to start? How can we unpack this?
Yeah, I think from moving from our bear work, then what I realised and what the organisation realised was we had very good systems in place to be able to work towards ending bear farming and running our sanctuaries. What we now needed to do was to try to engage more within captive animal welfare within the countries that we're working within, and to be able to provide more support. So we initially set up in China to work with the Zoo Association within China to offer some expertise in terms of animal management, in terms of bear management, to be able to improve the way that some of the zoos are actually operating in terms of the welfare of those bears, and also to try to tackle some of the issues of animals in entertainment as well. So a lot of bears, but also other animals, are used in circuses within China. And so we also wanted to work with the government and say, is there a way of us starting to reduce the number of animals in captivity, reduce the number of animals which are being used in this way? And so we've had a long-running program now of really just trying to engage with the public on this issue. It's still something which is a problem within China, but we are beginning to see a lot more people which are supportive now of ending the use of animals within entertainment, and particularly within circuses. We extended that program into Vietnam. And again, we've been very successful within Vietnam. And again, the government has been very much sort of outward looking in terms of the work that we've done with them with bears, and then has trusted us to actually say, okay, well, we now want to engage with you on some of these other issues. And so we've been able to start to put a stop to the use of wild animals in circuses within Vietnam very successfully. The Federation, the Circus Federation, have actually committed to ending the use of all wild animals in circuses, thanks very much to the work that we've been doing and the pressure that we've been putting on both them and the individual circuses. And then from that, we also started to look at some of the other areas of animal use within tourism. And one of the big areas is the use of elephants. And this is something across much of Asia, and the use of elephants, particularly in elephant riding. And so back in 2014, we actually approached the government on a second large program similar to our bears, which would work towards ending the use of all elephants in elephant riding tourism in Vietnam. And I'm pleased to say again, because we've taken a similar approach to that, and that program in terms of not being overly critical of the industry, which is being involved in the tourism industry, which is involved in actually exploiting the elephants, not being at all critical of the mahouts, who are the ones which are caring for the elephants and in some cases are actually physically harming the elephants to ensure that the people which are riding on them stay safe. But by saying we want to offer an alternative, and the alternative which we had to offer was to develop a whole new tourism program for people who are coming to the region to see elephants. So a lot of people come to Vietnam, and there's a particular province in Vietnam in the Central Highlands called the Dak Lak province, where there are a number of captive elephants, all of which are being used in elephant riding. And we said there's an opportunity here, because there's a national park where the wild elephants live, to be able to put some of those elephants back into the national park and to set up a walking with elephant tourism program. And so to completely change the tourism model, and the opportunity for the tourists to learn about the elephants as individuals as well. So again, going back to one of the main purposes of trying to sort of get people to empathize with these animals as individuals, we've managed now to remove 14 elephants so far from elephant tourism and put them into the national park. And now tourists can come into the park and follow their mahouts and their elephants as they walk and they go about their natural behaviors. Again, that gives us that opportunity to talk to people about the elephants as individuals, about their personalities, and then to actually demonstrate, or the elephants demonstrate, all of those social behaviors, all those natural behaviors that they would have been doing had they had the opportunity to live like this all of their lives. And of course, you know, it's amazing. You see all of these incredible behaviors that you would love to see in wild elephants, but it's very, very difficult to see. But you're seeing them right in front of your eyes with the captive elephants. So all of these incredible communications between the individuals, both the vocal communication, but also the tactile communication. Elephants are incredibly tactile. So when they come together each day, you know, they spend a huge amount of time exploring each other, just touching each other with their trunks, just having their own conversation with each other about, you know, whatever they're about to do, saying this is how one's feeling, how the other one must be feeling. And you can just watch this and interpret this, you know, right in front of your eyes, and see these bonds which are developing between these individuals and getting stronger and stronger. And we can give the tourists the opportunity to come and see that as well. And by doing so, then the individuals come out, and not only do they have a good experience, but they also learn a lot more about elephants and the complexities, the social, the emotional, cognitive complexities of elephants as a species, as well as learning about them as individuals. So that's really where our program sort of moved, as in addition to our bears, very much into captive, the welfare of captive animals used within tourism, and now onto a program of actually ending another industry within Vietnam, which has been leading to quite a lot of suffering for individuals.
I think that is so wonderful that tourists can come and experience wildlife in a way that is supportive to wildlife, because they learn to first and foremost understand these creatures. They can observe them without hurting them, and the more we understand something, the more likely we are to value them and then protect them. But at the same time, it's economically supporting the tourism operators, or these villages that are making their bread and butter from these activities, from these tourist activities. And I think the piece about your organization not criticizing these tourist operators because maybe they don't know any better, or really, their priorities to put again, food on the table. So they're going to do whatever they can to make a buck from these animals without prioritizing their welfare or their well-being. But now you're not criticizing them, but you're offering them an alternative. Again, it's that replacement of you can still be, you know, a successful tourist operator, but without harming wildlife, and you're not criticizing them. So therefore they're more receptive to this change, I think is such a beautiful model. And I wish, you know, everyone listening is inspired by this, and especially people who maybe have their own organizations for environmental change, social change, you know, maybe can learn something from this. For other countries, I think in Asia, but maybe around the world, I'm not really sure, that still have these elephant tourist activities, what do you want people to know? Because I know as a young child, when I went to, I think, Thailand with my family, and I think Sri Lanka still has them, we didn't know that we're harming the elephant. Now I know better. But what do you want people to know? Why is it so harmful to the elephant? They don't seem like, you know, they're really bothered by carrying humans. Humans don't weigh very much in comparison to them. So what would you want people to really take away from this conversation? And what do you need us to learn and to know about this industry?
I think one of the biggest things really is that it's the psychology for the elephants, in terms of if you put them into those situations where they are available to be ridden, then you're really removing them from most of those natural behaviours which they've evolved to carry out. Although, so maybe physically you might not see too many issues in terms of the way that the elephants are being treated. In some cases you will do. In some cases you see, you know, elephants with physical injuries because they're in a situation, they're obviously a very big animal. If they start to go into a situation which is unsafe, then the mahouts may use some physical intervention to try to ensure that they don't harm the public. But I think if you're just sort of seeing a group of elephants at a tourism camp for riding, you're generally just seeing animals chained up singularly. And really it's the psychological problems that creates for those elephants. They're incredibly social species. They range over very large distances. They need to be able to do all of those exploratory behaviours for foraging. You know, they're a species which during the day will eat for the majority of their 24 hours whilst they're out in their natural environment. So suddenly you just provide them with a dump of food. You know, it may be meeting their nutritional needs, but it doesn't meet their foraging needs. It doesn't meet the cognitive needs that they have to be able to carry out their natural behaviours. So I think really that's one of the major things which people maybe don't see when you go to these camps. And you may think, okay, well, you know, sitting on the back of an elephant, as you say, there might not be physical problems for that elephant to be able to carry those people. All depends on how the operators actually operate, to what kind of saddles they're using, how often their saddles are on, how many people sit on the back of them. All of those things differ in different camps, so it's difficult to say that they're all bad. Some will be worse than others, but it really, for all of those elephants, it's the psychological issues of just not being able to socialize with each other, and not being able to be in those family groups, which is what they've evolved to being, not really being able to make any choices for themselves, to be able to choices of where to go, when to eat. You know, they're just being presented with food when it's available. Even no choice to when they go for a drink either. So many of these elephants will only get the opportunity to drink probably first thing in the morning when they go into the tourism camp. Then they'll spend the day, sometimes in 40-degree heat in some of these countries. And then when they're going back away from the tourism camp, they may get the opportunity to drink again. So all of those things, that choice that they have is removed from them to make them available for tourists to come and see and ride and have a photograph taken. And then also, as we mentioned, there's the physical, the safety side of things. You know, for many, you know, these are huge animals. The bulls, and the males in particular, can be more dangerous than the females, and much more likely to be more aggressive or to react to situations. So once you've got lots of people in very close proximity, then the only safe way of having that is by having somebody who has some control over that individual elephant. And that the only way to get control is by force, to be that person that the elephant knows if they step out of line, they're going to have some kind of physical consequence. So there's that fear aspect as well to their lives, knowing that they might do something wrong and be punished for it. So I think it's really the psychological suffering for these individuals which we don't see, and I think that's something which people need to maybe sort of take that into consideration when they might see elephants, which maybe they're being fed, maybe they don't look like they're being physically harmed, but ultimately psychologically, then every day for them is so far removed from what they are wanting to do, what they've evolved to do, that they're really suffering psychologically.
Thank you for sharing that. I guess it's this backstage piece that not a lot of people see. They just see, the ride and that the elephants are walking, and they do a little bit of a show where the, trunk goes up with the water, and then they take their photo and they're done. But they don't actually consider and conceptualize the life of this animal. I'd love to speak a little bit more about circuses and again, provide people with an education about these wild animals in captivity. What would you like people to know about circuses? Why should we not take our children to these entertainment places that are actually teaching us how not to respect animals, if you ask me, and what's going on behind the scenes there?
Yeah, I think the words you just said there actually are really crucial. It's the behind the scenes, really, which is where the majority of that suffering takes place. I think circuses as a concept are there to entertain and for people to have fun. And so if you don't have an understanding of how an animal wants to live its life and some of the welfare problems that animal might be experiencing, you may just see an animal which is looking like it maybe is actually doing something voluntarily, or maybe even enjoying doing something, whereas the reality is anything different. To get animals, particularly wild animals, to be able to perform those tricks takes a lot of either physical intervention, so either physical punishment, or food deprivation. So the circuses and training of animals has changed over time, and a lot of it has become more food orientated, which is much more positive than the negative, which would have previously been just hitting animals until they do something, so making them do it out of fear. But also keeping an animal in a situation where it's constantly hungry is also not a good situation for that animal either. So now a number of circuses are really just using food deprivation to get an animal to do something so it gets a small treat. But it's not satiating that animal. It's not giving all the needs for that animal nutritionally. Beyond what the public is seeing, really the main suffering is happening behind the scenes. You can imagine these animals may be coming out for 5 minutes, 10 minutes per performance, but actually they'll spend almost 24 hours a day in a completely different situation. And most of these animals are then going to be confined in incredibly small areas. So regardless of whether it's a static circus or a circus which is there all the time, or a traveling circus, majority of animals like tigers and lions and bears will spend their time in either very small cages so they can be easily moved around, so they're presentable, so they can bring them out onto the circus arena, or they'll be chained up. So animals like macaques, elephants will spend almost all of their time then just on very small chains in this very deprived environment. There's nothing natural for them whatsoever. So no opportunity to be able to socialize with each other, no opportunity to choose when to be able to do the things that they would normally do. So really the use of wild animals in circuses is something that we really do need to continue to push to end, because there is no possible way of providing good welfare for a wild animal in that situation where you're asking it to do things which are completely unnatural. You're putting it into an environment which is completely unnatural. It's a very stressful environment. You can imagine you're bringing out animals like tigers and elephants, bears into an arena full of lights and people and noise. There's always a lot of music associated with these performances, just to really sort of bring the crowd along with the performance. And these animals have got to deal with all these incredibly difficult senses which they wouldn't normally have to deal with, and so they're in that state of fear. And really, if you start to look at it from that point of view, if you ever do go to the circus, then you'll see a completely different animal to the one which you maybe was thinking was having fun. You'll actually start to see the animal which is desperate to carry out what it needs to do to get away from that situation. And I guess most of these animals will learn over a period of time that if they just do what they're being asked to do, then they're allowed to leave and they can go backstage into a much quieter environment, even though that environment is then incredibly unstimulating. It will get them away from the pressure of being in front of the stage.
It's so sad. It makes me emotional now to think about it. And if I'm honest, like I've been boycotting circuses for a very long time once I learned about all this, but I just learned something new from you today. I didn't know they were starving them so that they could perform for the treat. That's horrendous because we're also talking about these massive creatures who are used to like hunting in the wild, like lions and tigers. So I can't even imagine, them being starved and then being put in these highly stressful situations. I mean, if we could just imagine ourselves being in those situations, it's just devastating and cruel. But also something I want people to understand is that these animals are social beings. And one of the biggest tortures for humans, because we are social beings, is solitary confinement. If you go to jail and you're being put in solitary confinement for like 24, 48 hours, you go crazy, or it's considered one of the biggest acts of torture. These animals live like this almost on a daily basis, if not in some cases their whole lives, and they're separated from their family member, their kin. So their babies are taken from them, their members of their communities taken away from them, and they're living in the solitary confinement for many, many years, and in some cases their whole life. So it's different. It's such a different level of cruelty that I don't think people appreciate and understand. And this is not the way we should be raising awareness or a relationship with wildlife or animals, especially for the new generation, for young people. And I'm very happy to see that a lot of young people are receptive to understanding the natural world in a different way. But still, for people out there who are really attracted by these touristic activities, please think twice. And that takes me to my next question, which is around aquariums, or these huge touristic sea aquariums. What do you call them exactly? These sea parks.
So for China, they're ocean parks. But around the world they get called different things. But they have become a major problem within China, in particular, over the last 10 years. And as people have got more and more disposable income within China, as people have become more economically better off, then things like safari parks and ocean parks develop so that people have more opportunity to enjoy and spend their free time at these places. Ocean parks there's now over 100 ocean parks within China. And majority of those have cetaceans, whales and dolphins, and the majority of those individuals have been wild caught. So these are bottlenose dolphins which are being caught off the coast of Japan as part of the Taiji dolphin drive, the drive hunt, which some people may have heard about. So this is a big hunt which kills a lot of dolphins off the Japanese coast, but also captures young individuals which are then trained and then sold into the ocean park industry. Majority of them are now ended up in China, and then they continue to have to do these performances. It also has beluga whales which have been caught from Russia. Killer whales, orcas, are also in China now and are now being bred within China. All of these animals are then kept in very sterile tanks, very little for them to do whatsoever. They're often, some of them will spend their time either socially isolated, or they're being put with individuals, sometimes not within the same species, which is obviously then very difficult for them to be able to communicate with each other and understand each other emotionally and understand each other's intentions. But also they might just be put with other individuals that they've not had the opportunity to develop a bond with. So it's almost like just forcing two individuals together. So the ocean parks may turn around and say, oh, look, we don't keep these individuals alone. We keep two bottlenose dolphins together. But that's just like randomly picking two people and putting them into the same room and expecting them to become friends. Individuals, it doesn't happen like that, and it may well be that one of those becomes dominant over the other and one of them spends most of its time being fearful of the other. In fact, when we go to some of these ocean parks, we often go and we see the shows and we document some of the things which these animals are being asked to do, but actually it's really important to be able to see these animals backstage just to get an idea of what's happening to them when they're not being asked to do anything. And what you often see is if you've got a group of animals, so you've got a small pod of dolphins, maybe 4 or 5, which are living within the same tank, then one of those will be incredibly fearful because the others are all bullying that individual. And in the wild, that individual would be able to get away from those individuals, and it would find another dolphin which has a similar personality type as it does, and be able to live a much better life. But when you're in that captive situation, then it's stuck in that group. And it doesn't always mean that just because it's got others in that group, then it's going to have a positive life. So all of those things are happening for these individuals. They're being forced, firstly taken away from their wild homes, put into a completely artificial environment, and then forced to live with other individuals that they haven't developed these bonds with. Of course, some of them will be able to develop those bonds. They're a very social species, so it's particularly things like bottlenose dolphins, beluga whales. Majority of them may well start to form friendships with the individuals that they are put with, and hopefully that at least provides some of those social needs that they have. But the environment itself then is completely barren, so it doesn't provide any of those other needs, all those cognitive needs, all those problem solving needs that these animals have to be able to, things that they would experience in the wild, being able to utilize their own problem solving skills, their own minds to be able to come up with solutions. Everything's just barren. Dead fish are thrown in for them to feed. There's no foraging. There's no hunting. All of those things which they've evolved to carry out are removed from them, which then just means that they end up really just being in a barren environment. And we see a lot of stereotypic swimming from captive cetaceans after they've been in these environments for a number of years. So you can often see, particularly bottlenose dolphins, which will just sort of often swim upside down and just sort of round and round in a tank for just continually. And again, similar to the captive environment where we see animals rocking or stereotyping pacing, then this stereotypic swimming is something which is really just a coping mechanism for the individual to try to deal with that deprived environment, try to deal with that boredom. So again, if anybody's thinking of going to the ocean parks, then you really do need to think twice about this, the way that these animals are being looked after, but also the source of the animals as well, where these animals have come from, because we say, many of these animals have been ripped from their family homes, from their families, from their wild groups, to then be brought into this environment for what? Just for our entertainment.
Yeah, I would say not just deprived environment, but depressed state, right? We actually know scientifically that these animals are in a completely depressed state. They're not just deprived of stimulation, like the natural stimulation that they would have in the wild, but also of socializing, because they're, again, proven to be highly social beings. But also something about these ocean animals, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but they use echolocation as a way to communicate, which means sound. They use sound. They're very sensitive to sound. And so what's particularly stressful with these animals in these ocean parks is not only is the entertainment so loud, there's music, there's screaming, there's clapping, there's an audience, but also even backstage, they're living in these tanks that have this hum. Like if you just think about like an aquarium with some fish in it, there's always this hum going on, and I'm not sure what it's from, maybe an oxygen tank or keeping the tank clean from the filter. But that hum for an animal that's so sensitive to sound and is really how they survive in the wild makes them, I think, lose their mind, is what I heard. And you see them, again, doing this kind of self-mutilation. They can't actually bite themselves because of the way that they are shaped, but they hit their head against the tank. And I think in some cases I've seen online that they've died that way. They've quote unquote committed suicide in that way because they couldn't take it anymore. They were just losing their minds. Have you seen that, come across that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely with the noise pollution is a major problem inside the performance arena. Then the level of noise is astronomical for these individuals to be able to cope with. Particularly then outside of that arena, yes, the filters which are operating, because these are huge tanks, trying to keep these huge tanks clean takes huge filters which then create a lot of background noise, so they're having to deal with that noise on a 24 hours a day basis, which is definitely going to have an impact on them. And then, yes, it will lead them to start to perform these unnatural behaviours. I haven't experienced any which have gone to the point where they've actually they've ended up dying from the injuries, but we've certainly seen a lot of unnatural behaviours within the individuals that we've observed, particularly sort of rubbing themselves against sort of the bars. So these tanks will then have sort of doors made of bars which will go from one tank to another, and the animals will rub themselves along that until they cause themselves injuries, or they will bite them, so they will start to break their teeth. And these things which you know is causing them some physical pain, it must be causing them physical pain, and yet they continue to do it. So again, showing just that level of suffering, that psychological suffering, which means that they continue to do something even though it is going to cause them some physical harm.
Dave, all this information you shared with us today is so important and valuable. I really appreciate your time and everything that you shared with us. What do you think is the way forward? What would you like to leave with people today? Any tips, any resources for them to learn more, to think about this further before we close?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you very much indeed. It's been really an honor to be able to give all this information. And I think, just to close, one of the most important things I think that we as an organization and me as an individual have found over the years working with this is really just raising awareness and getting people to understand those animals as individuals. That can be the piece which changes somebody's behavior towards an animal further down the line. And so I find that it's something which we can all do this. We can all learn more about animals. We can all learn about their natural behaviors, about them in the wild, the conservation of those individuals, particularly for the wild animals. But the thing which I think we really need to learn about is just their sentience, their emotional capacities, their cognitive abilities. There's, for social animals, just the complexity of those social lives. If we learn more about them, those aspects of those individual animals' lives, we're much more likely to empathize with them. And part of our work within Animals Asia is developing education programs which are very much centered around social, emotional and cognitive abilities, and not just of the wild animals that we've talked about. So not just about bears and elephants and dolphins, which are being used in circuses and ocean parks, but also about dogs and cats and about farmed animals as well. So again, changing people's opinion about the way that we raise animals for food. Just really giving people a sense of how an individual lives its life and experiences its life, and how rich that can be from an emotional point of view, helps people then, when they start to see how animals have been treated, maybe helps them to say, okay, I no longer want to be a part of that. I now understand that bears have these rich emotional experiences, and I go to a circus and I see a bear doing, crazy tricks. I now know that that's not something which that bear is enjoying. I'm no longer enjoying doing that. But then also bringing that right down to the level of hens on a farm and the way that they would live their lives, pigs, fish, etc. That's a really important piece for us within Animals Asia to try to change people's opinions about it.
I think it's about questioning any animal that's in captivity, whether for entertainment purposes, for food, just understanding that this is not a natural way for an animal to live, and to develop that empathy around an animal, and understanding and recognizing that it is a being and they all deserve to have a good life, whether, it's in the wild or on a farm. I think it would be interesting, Dave, to also maybe offer some people some options. Like, where can people learn more about wildlife? Do you have any resources or any businesses that you know more about? I think the example you gave at the beginning of this recording of this tourist attraction in Vietnam, where people can walk side by side with the elephants and view them in their natural environment, is a beautiful example of that. I think when people think about educating their kids around animals, they think about zoos, but again, there's a backstory to zoos and how animals are in captivity again, taken from their, wild environments, which is not necessarily good for them. And I would encourage people to also boycott zoos unless you know it's a rehabilitation center or a rescue center. So maybe people don't know how to engage with wildlife or how to educate their children, because children love animals, but we don't know how to get them experiencing wildlife or animals in a way that is helping them understand them better, and also cultivating this respect that we all should have with animals. So do you have any tips that we can leave people with?
Yeah, I guess, certainly going to our site at Animals Asia, then, there are lots of information there about how people can go about experiencing wildlife. We're doing a lot now in terms of responsible tourism, trying to sort of raise awareness about some of the problems with the use of wild animals in tourism, but also trying to promote some of the more responsible ways that people are operating tourism when there are wild animals involved. So people can certainly learn more about it from that. I think just in general, learning about animals and sort of emotional, cognitive abilities, this is something which is, the information is out there. There's so much science, there's so much behavioral research which is being done, both on captive individuals but also on wild animals as well, we're learning stuff every single day, just by choosing, a species and then just doing some searches around some of those, maybe not, the traditional sort of way of looking at animals in terms of their welfare, but also, saying, okay, well, what is it about the emotional aspects of this particular species that I can learn about? You'll find there's just a plethora of information out there in terms of what is available. We've actually put a lot of this together. Animals Asia is part of a large organisation or a coalition of organisations called the Asia for Animals Coalition. And all of this information I've put together on copious numbers of species about their complexity, social, emotional, cognitive complexity. And we call it a One Life program. And the One Life program was really because every individual has one life, and we need to respect that individual for having this one life on Earth. But the program really is an educational program, and if you want to find out more about species, go to Asia for Animals Coalition, find the One Life button, and on there you can pick hens, you can pick cows, or you can pick bats and pangolins and elephants and tigers. There's a piece on there for so many different species where you can really learn about them as individuals more than you're likely to get if you, say, sort of watch a natural history program and learn a lot about their geographical area and conservation. You learn more about these emotional and social and cognitive abilities. So, yeah, if anybody's interested, then please do take a look.
Yes, thank you. And I think also, like with anything, just knowing the business you're engaging with, taking a few minutes out of your day to research the business, whether it's a zoo or a circus, making sure that circus is animal free, which there are plenty of circuses that are now animal free. You just go for the entertainment with your kids, and like it's a fun afternoon, and that's fine with the clowns and all that. Knowing where your food comes from, so researching, that these animals were truly raised in the pasture, cage free, like truly understanding, that connection. Understanding, like I think San Diego Zoo has a section of it that is one that I visited that's just for rehabilitating and rescuing animals. So that was a business I was comfortable associating or visiting, I'd rather say. So really like making sure, that there is that ethical history with the business whenever you want to engage with it. And then, like Dave said, learning a little bit more about their sentience and their behavior and what they are and who they are as beings. Dave, where can people find you? I'm going to link everything below. So I'll share the Animals Asia website and social media links. But is there any other online platforms you'd like to share with people that I can link below?
No, I think by sharing the Animals Asia link, then people can learn a lot more about us as an organisation, learn more about the work that we do to rescue bears and the elephants. Sharing the Asia for Animals Coalition link will allow people to access all of that plethora of information about social, emotional, cognitive capacities of animals. So yeah, I think if those can be shared, that really does give people a really good starting point to be able to engage in some of these topics. And yeah, I'm more than happy for people to come directly to me to ask about certain situations. If they're visiting somewhere in Southeast Asia or in China, and they maybe aren't sure, then I'm sure I can put them in touch with somebody who works within that region to be able to give them some more advice about what it is they should and shouldn't do from an ethical point of view. So yeah.
Great. And people can find you on the Animals Asia website?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. And we can share my details through this podcast as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for being here. This was such a pleasure and an honor speaking to you. It's like a dream come true speaking with someone from Animals Asia. I'm so in awe of the work that you do. Thank you for doing the work you do. We need more people and more organizations like you on this planet. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, Alya. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Please share with family and friends that you feel could benefit from this episode, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a rating and review to support the show. Check out the links below for more information about my guests and where to find them. And make sure you're following me on Instagram at wholesome_practice to learn more about what I do. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you on the next one. This podcast is for educational purposes only and should never replace the advice of your doctor or physician. Always consult a medical professional before making any changes or adding anything new to your diet, lifestyle, or medication protocol.